Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. I work the night shift at a truck stop off the interstate. Most nights are the same drivers, same smell of burnt coffee and diesel, same lonely kind of quiet between midnight and 3 a.m. But last month, we had one of those nights that still gives me chills whenever I think about it. It started like any other shift. Around 1 a.m., this big red Kenworth pulled up to the far end of the lot. Nothing unusual there. Truckers snap in their trucks all the time. But what caught my eye was how the driver just sat there. The headlights were off and the engine idling. He didn't get out and he didn't come in for food or coffee. He just sat there. An hour passed, then 2, and still no movement. I could see the faint glow of a cigarette from the cab every now and then, but that was it. At around 3 a.m., my coworker, Jay, said that he went out back to take the trash, and he swore that he saw the driver standing behind the truck, just staring into the woods behind the lot. When Jay waved and said, "Evening," the guy didn't respond. He just turned and then climbed back into the cab of the truck. We figured that he was tweaking or just dead tired. Happens more than often than you think. But then the customers started mentioning weird things. One woman said she thought she heard crying coming from the truck. Another said that it sounded like someone knocking from inside of it. I went to look again at around 4:30, and the guy was sitting in the diner now. He was hunched over a cup of coffee that had to be cold by then. He kept looking toward the door every time someone came in, like he was waiting for someone. His clothes were filthy, not been on the road too long kind of filthy, but like something was soaked through and then dried, and his hands shook when he drank. I asked him if he was okay. He just muttered, "Oh, just a long haul," and didn't look up. I noticed his fingernails were dark. I thought it was grease, but now I'm not so sure. He looked extremely tired, too tired to be behind the wheel. His eyes had bags, so large that his eyes themselves seemed to have become sunken. When he got up, he stumbled a little bit, knocking over his cup by accident. At sunrise, he went back to his truck, and by then, the lot had filled up with more drivers. Normally, that's when people fuel or grab breakfast, but he just sat there again, his head dipping for a few seconds before perking up, like he was about to fall asleep, but managing to snap back awake for a second, only for him to droop once more. I finally told my boss, who decided to call the sheriff to do a welfare check on him. When the deputy showed up, they talked to him for a bit, and then one of them went around the back to the trailer. Next thing I know, they're both yelling for backup. We weren't told the details right away, but of course the word spread fast. One of the deputies later came in, pale as a ghost, and told my boss to keep everyone away from the windows. And the truck was impounded that morning. I didn't see what was inside, but from what the officers said later, they found a lot of disturbing stuff. Not drugs, not weapons. Worse, things that used to be people. They said the driver had been on the road for weeks, crossing state lines, picking up hitchhikers, and also runaways, and he kept them as trophies. They didn't tell us much else, just that he had been wanted for a while and have been on his tail for the past few days, which explained why he wasn't getting much sleep, and we were lucky we called when we did. Now, every time a rig pulls in and just sits there too long, I get this tight feeling in my chest. I still work nights, but I don't take the trash out alone anymore. I keep thinking about how he sat in that booth, shaking hands, staring at the door like he knew that it was over. And I keep wondering, how many times before had he stopped here and we never even noticed? I have been a long-haul truck driver for about 12 years now, and I have seen my fair share of weird things on the road. Accidents, strange lights, shady people at truck stops, even the occasional ghost story shared over a CB radio. But there's one night that still makes me uneasy. This happened about 4 years ago, somewhere along Highway 93 between Nevada and Arizona. That stretch of road is long, empty, and dark, the kind of place where the stars look fake because there is no light pollution and you can go an hour without seeing another set of headlights. It was around 2 a.m. and I have been driving for maybe 10 hours straight. I was tired, but not falling asleep tired, just that slow, quiet fatigue that makes everything feel slightly unreal. I remember noticing something odd in my side mirror. It was a pair of headlights way behind me. That wasn't unusual, really. Lots of trucks take this route, so I called in on my radio to say hi. I said, "This is Big Duck. What's your 20?" Only to be met with static. Again, nothing too unusual. Some people use a different frequency or just don't answer in general. But the headlight stayed a steady distance from me. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Still there, it was the same distance. I thought maybe it was another truck pacing me, so I slowed down a little, and the light slowed down too. I sped up, and so did they. It went on like that for almost half an hour, and eventually I flicked my CB on again and asked if anyone was out there. No response, just static. Finally, I decided to pull off at one of those small isolated rest areas, just a single bathroom building and a few old vending machines. I figured that if someone was following me, they would have to stop too. But when I turned into the rest stop and then looked in the mirror, the lights were gone. No car, no truck, just an empty highway. At that point, I told myself that I was overtired and seeing things. I parked, killed the engine, and went to stretch my legs. The night air was cold, and the desert was dead silent except for the buzzing of a flickering light above the restroom door. I was about to head inside when I heard gravel crunching behind me. It was footsteps, slow, deliberate ones, so I turned around expecting to see another driver. But there was no one there. It was just my truck, dimly lit by the overhead lamp. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds with my heart pounding, waiting for something to move, but there was nothing. And then I heard the CB radio crackle inside the cab. Just static at first, and then faintly, a voice. It said, "This is Big Duck. What's your 20?" It was staticky, but very clearly my voice. I swear to God, every hair on my neck stood up. I climbed into the cab, locked the doors, and I floored it out of there. My hands were shaking so bad that I could barely shift. I didn't stop until I reached a larger truck stop an hour away. I don't know what was happening, if the signal bounced on something and just came back an hour later, or if someone was just really good at impersonating me on the CB. But whatever it was, I didn't care. I knew that it was time to go. When I checked later, it wasn't even on the same channel that I used, and somehow it had switched by itself. To this day, I don't know what that was. I've heard stories about people disappearing out there, or strange lights that mess with electronics, and odd occurrences during the long drives at night. But I have never heard of anything like this, nor has it ever happened again. Still, every time that I drive through that stretch of desert, I catch myself watching the mirrors, just in case those headlights show up again. And I'm not as friendly or talkative anymore.
This isn't my story. It's my dad's. So I'll have to try to remember how he said it. Back in the 80s, my dad had a trucking job where he would deliver goods interstate. Before us kids were born, him and Mum would travel the country together and come home to spend time with his family, who they lived with. They'd often go on unofficial road trips. He was driving from Sydney to Brisbane, one of the routes taken many times previously. It was nighttime and my mum was asleep, as she often did. The road was empty. I remember him saying it had to be 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning, so it was still dark out. The only light came from his headlights. Back then, like many places, there weren't as many buildings on the road, but there were some. He said it was difficult for him to stay awake, so he kept drinking really strong coffee. There was nothing to alter his perception, so to speak. I hope you understand what exactly I'm trying to say. He said he was driving along with nothing happening, and suddenly, there was a person standing in the middle of the road, and he managed to stop in time. He told me he braked hard, and remembered the loud screech that followed. Fortunately, it was of the brakes instead of a person. His heart was racing, and Mum had fallen off the bed with a yell, having no warning to brace herself. I must have a weird sense of humor, because I thought that part was hilarious, especially since Mum gets grumpy every time he brings it up. He said he didn't feel like he hit anything, while he was comforting her, telling her there was someone on the road. So he wanted to get out to check. She was going to get out too, but he told her to stay inside. He got down and saw no one there. He said he called out into the dark, and obviously, no one answered. He thought maybe it must have been a big kangaroo on the road, maybe one of the big reds, but it was too far east for them. Instead, he got back inside the truck, turned off his hazard lights, and got back on the road. My dad said he had a feeling of being watched from the side of the road, but there was no one there. It wasn't the first time he had issues when it came to people on the road. Since he didn't want to scare Mom, he didn't tell her what he was feeling. The drive was long, and he was still an hour away from the next pit stop, where he'd be able to get out and stretch his legs. You know, the slogan, stop, revive, and survive. Although that might have come a bit later. The road looked familiar, but not quite. He'd been traveling down this road for years. There were usually signs, other cars and trucks, petrol stations, and fast food restaurants like Macca's at the side of the road. There was nothing. My dad said my mom had gone back to sleep, so it was just him. He wondered whether he was going down the wrong road. He said it felt like it went on forever. There were no other cars or trucks on the road either. This was before GPS or Google Maps, so it would be difficult to immediately tell where he was. While he was driving, he saw blank figures by the side of the road. He remembered going too fast to see any distinctive features. It gave him an unsettling feeling. I remember him saying that the air itself felt weird. The weather had changed. It was supposed to be cloudy, and suddenly there were clear stars. Out there on the country roads, you could easily see the bright stars in the night sky. When he'd tell this part of the story, he'd look like there was much more to it, but he'd never tell me what it was, like he was keeping a secret from me. I don't know if it was one of those glitch in the Matrix things, or if there was something weird about what he saw. He said nothing felt right. He tried waking Mum up by calling her name, but she didn't budge. He said it felt like forever. Then he blinked, and suddenly everything was back to normal. There were signs by the side of the road, other cars and trucks, and different buildings. When Mum woke up, she mentioned having a weird dream, but the longer she was awake, the harder it became to remember it. The rest of the drive went okay, and he hasn't had a repeat of what happened. So, does anyone have any ideas? Thanks.
I have been driving trucks for a long time, long enough that most nights blur together. Miles of highway, truck stop coffee, same playlist, same empty rest areas. I like night runs though because the roads are quiet. The downside is that sometimes, when I start getting tired, I make small mistakes. This happened a few years ago, somewhere in the middle of Kansas. It was past midnight, that stretch of the night where even the radio gets quiet. I had been on the road for 12 hours straight, and I was trying to find a place to park for a few hours of sleep. The GPS showed a truck stop a few miles ahead. There were no reviews, just a small icon on the map. I figured that maybe it was one of those older stations that hadn't been updated online in a while. The exit ramp was darker than most, no streetlights, no other cars, and when I came off the highway, the air felt heavier somehow. Just that deep rural silence that eats up all the noise. The GPS said that I was half a mile from the stop, so I followed the narrow 2-lane road past a few trees and an old billboard with half the letters missing. I started to get the feeling that something was off when I saw how overgrown the shoulder was. Grass came right up to the pavement, weeds tall enough to brush against my steps, and when I finally saw the truck stop, my stomach sank a little. It was just an empty lot with cracked asphalt and a couple of rusted light poles that weren't even on. The old sign was still there, leaning slightly, but the name had faded until you could barely read it. The whole place looked like it had been closed for years. I was already committed to the turn though, and the lot looked wide enough to maneuver. So, I decided to swing around and head back toward the highway. The only light came from my own headlights sweeping across the broken pavement. The reflection caught bits of glass, the edge of a dumpster, a patch of old oil stains, and everything else was just dark. As I started my turn, my GPS froze. The map screen stopped moving, and the little blue triangle just sat there pointing into nothing. I felt my chest tighten a bit for some reason. I knew exactly where I was, but that still made me uneasy. Technology quitting on you in the middle of nowhere always does. I eased forward, checking my mirrors, lining up the turn so I could head back out the way that I came. Well, that's when I saw a faint glow on the road behind me. headlights. Another vehicle had taken the same exit. At first, I felt a little relieved. It was always nice knowing someone else is around. But then that relief faded when I realized the truck wasn't passing by. It was slowing down, turning into the same lot. I watched it in my mirror as it rolled forward, lights dimming, engine idling deep and low. It was another semi, older model, maybe white or gray, hard to tell under the weak light really. It pulled in behind me and stopped right at the mouth of the exit, perfectly positioned so that if I tried to leave, I'd have to pass within a few feet of its bumper. The driver didn't move, and no one got out. The engine stayed on, humming steady. The headlights stayed off, and only the faint glow of the running lights tracing its outline. For a minute, I sat completely still, foot on the brake, watching the mirror, and my own truck rattled softly. I could hear the wind moving through the weeds outside, and I just kept waiting for something. Maybe for the other driver to step out and wave, or maybe pull up beside me. But none of those happened. Just that the other truck was sitting there, blocking the only way out, engine running in the dark. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe he'd done the same thing that I did. Pulled in thinking that this was an active stop, and now he was trying to turn around. Maybe he was just resting before backing out. But the longer it sat there, the harder it was to believe that. I kept my headlights pointed toward the back of the lot so that I could see if anyone moved. My heart was beating hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. I checked my mirrors every few seconds. Still nothing. Still that quiet low idle. 5 minutes passed, maybe more. It's hard to judge time when all you can hear is your own breath and the rumble of two engines. And then I finally put the truck in reverse, crept back a few feet, and I turned my cab toward the exit, and the other rig stayed still. When I started moving forward, slow and steady, it finally shifted. The brake lights flashed once, then it rolled backward just enough to open a narrow gap. I kept my speed low as I pulled past, trying not to look directly at the cab, but unable to stop myself. The cab windows were tinted, but I thought that I saw a shape in the driver's seat. No movement, just someone sitting there watching me go by. I didn't make eye contact. I didn't even breathe until I was back on the highway ramp. And when I finally merged back onto the interstate, I looked in my side mirror, and the other's truck lights came on again, but it didn't follow. It just sat there at the end of the exit ramp until the curve of the road took it out of sight. I drove for another 40 miles before I stopped at a real truck stop, one with bright lights and a few other rigs parked under the canopy. I sat there for a long time with my engine off, staring at the empty space in front of me, trying to figure out what had actually happened. Maybe it really was another driver who took a wrong turn and needed room to turn around. Maybe he never even noticed me. But what sticks with me is how deliberate it felt, how perfectly he parked, how long he waited before moving. There was no reason to stop right there, no reason to block the exit for that long. I never trusted random GPS stops since then. I stick to places that I know, real truck plazas with lights and cameras and people. Because that night, for a few minutes, I understood just how easy it is for someone to make you disappear in the middle of nowhere, and no one would even know where to start looking. I'm not sure if I'm just exaggerating things, but I can surely say that that was one of the most confusing and creepy thing that I have ever experienced. Everybody, please stay safe out there. And here's the riddle for this video. Hey everyone, this is your creepy sister. Thank you so much for watching the video. I do hope you enjoyed it. Also, don't forget to leave a like and a comment. It really helps the channel out. A big shout out to both my channel members and Patreon members. Thank you so much for taking your support to the next level. You guys are great. And again, to everyone, stay scared because your fear feeds me.